when we look back on 2024, we will say people in fantasy football leagues that did well in part because they knew about which offensive line's potential. That more this week on the couch. We're here with Draft Daddy, offensive line guru, Matt Bitonti. So when you think about looking ahead to looking back on this season, which offensive lines are you paying close attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I like them all. They're all kind of like my babies, but I think at
Uh,
the bottom of the bottom of the ranking, I have Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're in the middle of a rebuilding situation, and I think it's important to understand what's happening at the bottom of the rankings and what teams have a chance to move up quickly and what teams are just there because they don't have enough talent or whatever like that. So I would say Pittsburgh, Tennessee, Green Bay, these are all interesting teams that could be a lot better at the end of the year than at the beginning.
yeah, the Tennessee. Let's use Tennessee as a jumping off point to talking about offensive line coaches, because I think that there are some names. If we look back, like Dante Scarnecchia, I mean, they're names that if you were familiar with these names and you understood what the potential they have to change influence on offensive lines level of play, which in turn influences productivity, the fate of these teams, fantasy football. Another one is Bill Callahan, who's now in Tennessee. And I thought, when we were talking before the show about potential topics, and I brought up Bill Callahan, I thought what you said was perfect about how he registers in your model. And not all offensive line coaches can have as much influence as Bill Callahan. But if you were to say, watching Tennessee's offensive line the last few years, what could turn this around? Matt, you might have said Bill Callahan.
Yeah, there's so many ways to judge these guys. I grade the players, but I also grade the coaches. And Bill Callahan is off my scale. So I have a 1 to 5 scale for coaches, and Bill Callahan is a 6. And you're like, how do you get there? Well, you get there because you look at all their resumes, just like the players, and guys who are former head coaches, guys who are head coaches in college, um, guys that make over $1 million, which is not public knowledge, but there's certain coaches are being invested in, and certain coaches you're like, this is their first time, so they're probably pretty affordable. You call that non-cap spending, you know what I mean? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
Bill Callahan, if you're hiring Bill Callahan, he's going to get his fee, and it's well deserved. He built lines in Dallas, he built the line in Cleveland. I mean, he's great not just at developing top end guys, but he'll find yourself a Wyatt Teller or some guy, you know, from anywhere in the draft or like and
Mm-hmm.
undrafted guys. He's really good at that. He's the man. So I mean, not all rooms are equal in terms of the coaching abilities, and obviously Bill Callahan's a type of guy in a perfect spot because he's got such a resume that if you bring him onto your team, you sometimes think this guy he could replace me in an interim basis, but that's not going to happen with his son there.
Yeah,
You know what I
yes.
mean?
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
But if like
I mean, it's a
Robert
package
Saleh,
deal. Yeah.
if some sort of coach on the hot seat hires this guy, and then you're like, well, mid-season they could just pull him because he's done this job before, and so it's actually kind of hard to get a job that meets your credentials. There's only a few guys that I have as highly ranked as him. Just
Mm-hmm.
real quick, like Jeff Stoutland in Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Cromer in Buffalo does a heck of a job. Chris Foster in San Francisco is a very highly rated guy. Andy Heck in Kansas City is like a legend. But, we're talking about a handful of guys, 4 or 5 guys that are on that level.
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really terrific point about some of these internal forces uh, that Bill Callahan can be brought in with his son, and there's harmony there, and a little bit of a package deal, but one that could improve the part that is the sore spot by far of this Tennessee offense, because they bring in, they have now Calvin Ridley to help. Obviously, they draft J.C. Latham in the first round. They bring in Lloyd Cushenberry. I think that certainly that, by the way, brings up, well, what's Denver going to do at center? Anyway, that's a different topic. But this could be a team that turns things around really quickly. I also like the way you point out it's not just coaching up or getting the most out of the players that are there. It's finding something maybe that a previous offensive line coach couldn't. And it was fun looking through the offensive line coaches preparing for this, getting ready to talk offensive line with you. It's interesting seeing some of the names, right? You see former offensive linemen, you see the bloodlines. Speaking of bloodlines, like Tony Sperano Jr. You
Yep.
know,
Yep.
as you, I'm just curious. Like as you're watching, I'd like that you said all the offensive lines are your babies, and I
Yep.
suppose the caretaker, the teacher, the coach, the mentor is the coach. So that's part of the picture as you're watching offensive line hires, because everybody's watching head coaching hires or coordinator hires. Not everybody is watching position coach hires. How you watching these guys come up and what these teams are choosing? Is that part of the fun for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have a part of my grading scale for a player, a coach that has been a player in the NFL.
Ooh,
You get a bump for that. Just like in terms
yes,
of you're not going to be the minimum, you're not going to be, no matter who you are. If you're Hank Fraley, O-line coach of Detroit, you've only been there 3 years, but you're Hank Fraley. He's not like new to
yeah,
the scene. Um,
hmm,
Joe Delisandris in Baltimore is another kind of legend. One of these guys that's been in there for
yeah,
40 plus years. And talking about legacies, I love the Tony Sperano Jr. shout out in Indianapolis. How about Luke Butkus in Green Bay?
yeah. But in
He's like
Green
a
Bay,
nephew. He's like a nephew of, I guess, Dick Butkus or some sort of
yeah.
He's not his son, but he's related there, and that's like I think that's really cool. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I don't give him any extra points for being his nephew, but it's like he's a guy I'm watching. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And you mentioned Denver real quick. Just like a random thought that doesn't make itself into the rankings. I think there might be a trade at center. I think
Hmm.
Robert Hainsey is might be the odd man out in Tampa Bay after their draft, and they're not going to move him to guard, and maybe they can get a pick for him. I guess it depends how badly Denver is tanking. You know what I mean? Or like how
Hmm.
serious they are about making fixing this problem. But right now I have Luke Wattenberg as the starter. There's like no way that's going to happen. You know what I mean? Some
Hmm.
of these depth charts in May is very like they keep the position open to see what kind of competition they get, and then at the last minute they move in some guy that was there last year or something.
Hmm. No, I think that you're right that we need to keep in mind in general, third wave of free agency. We had a few things shake loose after the draft, but really it's that first 2 weeks of camp that teams see what they have. And then that's triggers a fourth wave. And really an extension of that is after final cuts. You'll see some trades, you'll see some players claimed. So there's still some movement, but we have a pretty good idea of what these offensive lines are going to look like. And going back to close on that point about former player coaches and just legacies, it's interesting how two different forces clash on this topic because you mentioned Detroit. And one of the things that really got me interested in Detroit when they hired Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes was the staff was almost exclusively made up of former players. And I believe Dan Campbell said something to the effect of, a former player that becomes a coach is hungry because you have to go all the way back down to the bottom after you have to pick people up at the airport. You have to do all of these jobs. You're back at the bottom rung of the food chain, and if you have that in you to be willing to do that, then you're coming from I would say like a purist place about the game and wanting to be part of the game. Now, on the other hand, some of these legacies may have to do with nepotism. NFL is one of the last places where nepotism is just practiced out in the open. Not always to bad results, but
I see it
maybe if you're looking
also
at
in
ownership. Go ahead.
WWE. You see it in WWE now. Dusty Rhodes' son is the champion, and like, Rey Mysterio's kids are having a. You know what I mean? It's like
Uh huh.
it's names that you're familiar with, and it hits like a spot. I think
Hmm.
it's an interesting. We could do an hour on nepotism, but also it's kind of like when we do these draft picks, and we could.
Hmm.
This is a nice Joe Alt segue. It's like
Uh huh.
they're the guys who are somebody's son, like John Elway's son Jack. He didn't really do anything. He just kind of, but to make it to the NFL and to be like a number 5 pick or something like that, you have to
Mm-hmm.
really be taught and learn, like, how to grind. And like you're talking about the guys who are the coaches, yeah, definitely to start over again, it's really tough. I think when people talk about like, oh, like Aaron Rodgers will be a great mentor. It's like Aaron Rodgers is not a coach. He's not going to take,
Mm-hmm.
he's not going to do that. He's not going to pick people up at the airport and start over again. He's going to, he's
No.
not. Some guys, you really have to be humble for that job. So like, yeah, I mean, we can go in any direction on this, but we were talking about Joe Alt for a second, and I
Yeah.
love looking at these prospects, Joe Alt versus JC Latham. What's their upside? What's their downside? That's how we got started, was looking at the draft. And you know as well as anybody that nobody has a perfect prospect profile. There's,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
somewhere there's a copy of Barry Sanders' profile that says too small or something. Like there's always
Right.
something. And we were talking about whether Joe Alt is too big. He's 6'9". There's not a lot of guys, that big over history. And I kept digging and digging. Who can I find that's like a comp for this? Because a lot of the guys are like Dan Skinner, kind of big guys, Mike McGlinchey, kind of big guys. And then I came across Jonathan Ogden. you
Mm.
know that's like what your comp is for him. It's like there's always, you're like, is it too big? Is it possible to be too big? You live through the Mekhi Becton sort of thing, and you're like, is JC Latham too big? Is 340,
Right.
can it become 360 if he doesn't pay attention to it? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so I think there's definitely when you look at these prospects and that you look at, everybody's getting bigger, the centers are getting bigger, and it's like, how big is too big?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that topic, and this comes up as we reflect, as you said, people have been doing this for a while, is, we're old enough to remember that there were tops of size thresholds on the offensive line. There was such thing as a center prospect that was too tall. He can't stay in the pivot because he's too tall. And with Graham Barton, you mentioned Tampa Bay. I mean, he was left tackle. So that's changing. But like you said, then the other end, is there a new threshold? It might just be like the physiology of the position. But I want to go back to Joe Alt. And really quickly to touch on something you said, because I asked Dane Brugler about this on the couch last year, because it's so, I don't know what the percentages are, but man, the bloodlines of the NFL, when we're covering the draft, it is so prominent in the draft. And I asked him, I said, what do you think is the bigger factor in such a prevalence of second generation, third generation? Are we due a fourth generation player yet? We're going to get there. Is it is it genetics, or is it growing up around the game, like having people that teach you this is what it takes to be a professional? And I thought it was really great, your treatment. If Louis Reese Zamet becomes anything at all in the
Yes.
NFL, your original treatment of him behind the scenes at Football Guys in our base camp, one of the things you mentioned was, well, he's already at the top of the world, one of the top 100 players in the world in rugby. So even though he's like 22, 23, he knows what it takes to be a professional. So that's big. I mean, that's something that's important, because with some of these college players crossing over the NFL, and I recommend everybody Matt Waldman's piece, The Great Emotional Divide. He wrote it like 11, 12, 13 years ago. What he throws in there describes it very well, that there's a leap in terms of that's what's required of your emotional, psychological, spiritual maturity to make it in the NFL that isn't required to make it and get to the highest level of college football. And no prospect can know with 100% certainty how they're going to deal with that. And a lot of times players are busts, not because of anything to do with anything we can watch or measurables or production or anything like that, or the system they played in. It's that. And certainly growing up around professional sports would be something that would help you be prepared for that. But Dane said, nope, genetics. I mean, he said, some of that, the genetics. Go. Do you have anything you want to add before we get back into some red meat
Yeah, I
football
mean, I
topics?
think you definitely need to have world class size and speed and all those things, and those gifts are very important, especially for first round players. But I think in defense of the nepo baby, it's kind of hard to follow into these footsteps.
Yeah.
It's like talk about guys that are around professional sports. How about Patrick Mahomes? His father was a
Mhm.
reliever for the
Mhm.
Mets or something like this. And just being in
Yeah.
the locker room and seeing how these guys
Yeah.
interact, as opposed to someone like Zach Wilson, or, who can never quite get the love of his teammates, or he's saying the wrong
Mhm.
thing, or he's,
Mhm.
just not quite you don't feel like he's earned it. It could be a classism thing, but I also feel like that only gets you so far. And
Mhm.
genetics only get you so far. And if we see this every year with guys that are like amazing size speed guys, but they just don't have what it takes. Work ethic is just as important as all these things, especially in the NFL. You can
Sure.
get by in college. You really can get by with what you're given, but you're
Mhm.
going to have to work and endure pain and grind much on a level that you're not really prepared for. So for sure, it's a wake up
Right.
call for these guys. And some guys like Zach Frazier or like Jackson Power Johnson, you think, oh, they're ready for it. They eat it for lunch. Or like Talise Fuaga, he talk about how much he loves
Mhm.
football. And other guys, you're
Mhm.
just like, is he just there because he's that size? And if he was bigger,
Right.
he might be NBA or something. And it's like, it's a very interesting thing. And that's kind of why the draft is like so, it's so much potential. It could be everything, it could be nothing.
Yeah.
Before we move on from Joe Alt, when you
Yeah.
look at his vibes, he's like a very Joe Thomas kind of like vibe. He's very
Sure.
like,
Who
he's just like,
and
he
you remember the
doesn't
story
care
about Joe Thomas? Yeah.
when he went
Do you remember the
fishing.
story about what he was doing? Yeah, exactly.
He
He was
was
out fishing.
fishing.
Was he fishing with, like, his
Yeah.
pop? Was he with his
He was
dad just
fishing with his
fishing?
pop on the lake,
Yeah.
and I don't know if he got the call or if he got the call when he got off the lake or whatever it was, but they
Yeah.
they do this thing where they call them to make sure they're around, and then before they draft
Right.
them. And Joe Alt wasn't on a lake, but he was like with his family. He was wearing like
Yeah.
sweatshirts with no logos and stuff. I mean, it's just little
Right. Right.
things, and you could tell a lot from body languages. When they
Mhm.
get up on stage, and you're like, wow, that's quite a suit or something, or that's quite a
Right.
choice of necklace or whatever. It's like a $2
Mhm.
million necklace or something. And like, Joe Alt is like, he probably gets his clothes at Costco or something, if they even make
Right.
clothes that fit him there.
Right, like Jim Harbaugh. Like, and we won't end with the alt talk, and we'll bring it back to Harbaugh. Um, and yeah, there's so much of the human element. I mean, I think what we continue to touch on is that human element of football. And teams are scouting the tape and they're looking at the measurables and production and analytics, but teams are also just looking at that human element and the classic does he love football and things like that. But like you said, there's no easy way to sort it out, because some of the players they say does he love football turn out to be great, some of them turn out to be Kadarius Toney. um, but Jim Harbaugh, and it was cool, I got to do something with Thomas Emmerich this week. I think it'll come out next week. It's a nostalgic show where we go back and watch a game from a long time ago and talk about it. It was the Steelers Colts AFC title game when Jim Harbaugh was
Mhm,
the quarterback of the Colts.
mhm.
Sadly, if it was any Steelers Jets playoff games, that'd be sad times for you and the Jets fans. There's been some epic
I'm
Jets
used to it. I'm
collapses.
used to it.
Yeah, it's true. But I was watching Jim Harbaugh, and you're right. Like, I was thinking about, you talk about just buying your clothes at Costco. Isn't that Jim Harbaugh and the slacks? But he was actually, he seemed like more like a surfer dude, like more laid back then when they were recording NFL films. It was like maybe early 2000s. I think. But he maybe hadn't even coached Josh Johnson at the University of San Diego yet. But Harbaugh ball is back, not in San Diego, but it's back with the Chargers. And like you said, you can look at Barry Sanders' profile, scouting report. You can look at a lot of scouting reports. I think the NFL, or at least NFL fans, understand this a lot more. It's this idea of, don't tell me what he can't do, tell me what he can do. And it isn't finding a perfect prospect, like you said. It's finding a prospect who matches his heat zones and his mentality, his approach to football, matches your program and matches what you're going to ask out of the position this guy's going to be asked to play. So we know what Jim Harbaugh likes to do, but he's only had one draft. Joe Alt, okay. Um, when you look at the fit of the Chargers offensive line for the way that he likes to get after it on offensive side of the ball, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Alt film is awesome to watch. It's like a lot of like, he gets his hands on somebody, pancakes them across the formation. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
he's really a people mover. He can get out to second level. Tremendous. I think his 3 cone was like historic, for a guy that size. Tremendous short area quickness. Um, very, very good technician in pass blocking. I think if you're going to pick the pick in any way, Joe Alt is more of a natural left tackle than a right tackle, maybe. And JC Latham is more of a natural right tackle than a left tackle. And if you could go back and switch those guys, maybe that would be a better fit. Like, how much is Rashawn Slater a part of your future? He was a former All Pro, whatever. But all that aside, I think Alt's like the type of guy. It's a great first pick to make for any coach or GM because he's like almost definitely not going to bust. Now, the other side
Yeah.
of that is, do I think that Joe Alt is going to be like a multiple all pro type of guy? We'll see. He might just be a Colton Miller or a Mike McGlinchey, a guy that does his job every week for 10 years. And you need that guy, but who's going to be on the all pro team? It might not be him. We'll see. It depends how the team does and everything. But I like that line a lot. I like, Zion Johnson. Just, it's like, and Corey Lindsey's coming back. That's like another kind of comeback name that you kind of have to like,
Mm-hmm.
he's under the radar. But if Corey Lindsey comes back, now you've got like a really top, they're all going to come back. But if he comes back at the level he used to play at, that's like right now I have him at 8 and they could go higher. That's like a really up and coming line.
Yeah, if the Chargers are a surprise this year, um, that is probably going to be a big part of the story, right? And they get to start out with Vegas and Carolina, then Pittsburgh and Kansas City, and then a bye to figure things out. We have a schedule to talk about now, Matt.
Yeah.
So you will see. But I think that your ranking of number 8 for the Chargers and your discussion of what they have, including Lindsley, should put, this is the best thing you can do for fantasy football. We're going to make our picks, we're going to commit, we're going to plant our flags, but just massage your brain and be open to all the possibilities. So when they actually start to play the games that count, you'll say, oh, this is the direction this is going to go. The Chargers running game is going to be on track because of this offensive line, and they're going to create some momentum that maybe was unforeseen. And, that's how you don't have to wait for it to be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And by the time there's that much evidence, there's no buy low, sell high window or otherwise opportunity to get that edge. The offensive line's an edge. You talked about Joe Alt. He said he loved watching his tape. This was a pretty high end peak class of offensive linemen in the first round this year. And I love that when you talk about this, I know there is a sense of it excites you. It's something that I think the word you love again comes up. I know you love offensive line play in this class. Is Alt your guy? Who's your guy when you were watching them? Because I know I liked watching Amarius Mims. I was hoping I'm half fine with the Steelers pick. Don't get me wrong, I love it. But who was your guy in this excellent class of offensive linemen?
It was Fuaga, Tilly's
Mm,
Fuaga, 100%. And
wow.
I actually, this was a really good year. But it's like, would you rather have, if you had the choice, would you rather have a guy that just starts at left tackle, like Olu Fashanu, or a guy that makes all pro at right tackle? It's like one of those kind of like, or maybe you know what Fuaga is, like a better Mike Iupati. Remember Mike
Wow.
Iupati?
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Just like you could put him at right guard and he could crush. But you see these picks and you're like, okay, why would they take him? Because Ryan Ramczyk has got serious knee injury
Mm-hmm.
concerns, and right now it's kind of like, will he come back? But I've done this enough times to know when to pull someone out of the lineup and be
Yeah.
like, show,
Yeah.
prove it to me, Ryan. Right at this point, so I think Fuaga will start. I think probably week 1 at right tackle, and they were like, well, what's he going to do with him? He's going to play his natural right tackle spot because Ryan Ramczyk is essentially kind of done, and Cole Strange might be, following right behind him. These guys, they have these knee injuries, they don't always come back. It's
Yeah.
like a modern,
And I
we
think
have modern medicine, and it's amazing what like Aaron Rodgers can do, and all these guys coming back from with these crazy injuries. But some of these, they're big dudes. And but just to go back a second, the class was great. There was like a lot of names. I had guys in the second and third round. I loved watching Zach Frazier. I loved watching these Mauler types. There was just like it was just probably a historically good class, I think, when we look back on it.
yeah, it's good too because anything that gets more attention on offensive line play, the unsung heroes, and you mentioned how Fuaga is going to play this big role. It's really funny because down here in New Orleans, and again, I don't want to name names, uh, but was fascinating to me because you become familiar with like the healthcare systems here, and there's one healthcare system that is aligned with the Saints. Their name is all over everything that the Saints do. And again, I don't want to speak ill or otherwise get out of the football lane here, but let's just say living in New Orleans, would not necessarily have a high opinion of how things function in this healthcare system. Also, they're administering the healthcare to the Saints. Come to find out, Michael Thomas, who is not afraid to talk, I guess now that he's not in the Saints organization, said, yeah, it's not surprising to him that Ryan Ramczyk is having so much trouble coming back from this injury because they gave the same rehab folder to everybody, no matter what their injury was, that they all like compared notes and saw it's all the same. They're telling us the same things, even though that we have different injuries, which is something that I would have probably predicted based on, again, experience in the healthcare system that this company runs. So sometimes there's some insight there. But yeah, I think you're right to say that the writing's on the wall, that Ramczyk's not going to contribute much. Now, Cole Strange famously was the Rams, Sean McVay and company, right, that laughed at that pick. That was the one, I believe.
Yeah, he weren't the only ones, but yes, a lot of
And
people
it turned out to
were
be a decent
questioning.
pick, right? It turned
Yeah,
out to be
for
a
a
pretty
while.
solid pick.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now he's got this injury. So let's talk New England's offensive line. They've got a new coaching staff, but they also have potentially a new quarterback in the number 3 pick, Drake May. When you look at the offensive line for New England, knowing that Cole Strange is not going to be ready for week 1, et cetera, if the Patriots called you up, Jared Mayo called you up and said, how risky is it to put a quarterback like Drake May out there week 1 behind this line?
Extremely risky. I mean, I would recommend it. I mean, uh, we don't. So they're one of those lines where we don't know what the lineup is going to be. So like Saidi Sow might play where Cole Strange is, and Antonio Mafi might play where Sow is, and they drafted this guy Robinson in the 4th round from Texas A&M, and it's like, what's the lineup? And when you don't know what the lineup is, and we're almost in June, that can be concerning. Also, they're not the type of guy. They don't have like a famous. They don't have Dante Scarnecchia. I think they have Scott Peters or some guy. It's like it's kind of like a rebuilding situation, and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
I like Onwenu. He's awesome, and they were really smart to not let him get to free agency. He's like a borderline Pro Bowler in my ranking, so it's not all bad. But it's just like, what's the lineup? Get some cohesion with these guys. Is Caden Wallace from Penn State going to be your left tackle? Is it going to be Vidarian Lowe? Is it going to be Chuck Okorafor? Is like, who is your guy? And I think it's tough when you're looking at a team like that. You'd be like, they can get better, but they're not going to get to the top 10 of these rankings this year, unless something changes and somebody turns into an out of the nowhere player, which does happen. But it's just like certain lines have like a natural limit on them, and I would say run the ball. I would say run the ball a lot is what you want to do with that line. And I also feel like some of these teams, they're obviously, everyone wants to win, but some teams kind of have
Mm-hmm.
an eye on the future, and because of the amount of certainty in New England, I don't know what their lineup is actually going to be.
Yeah, that's not a great place to be. And like you said, you don't want the plan to be some guy's got to emerge out of nowhere and we'll be okay. And what's fascinating about that one too is I think pretty consensus in agreement across all, no matter how positive or negative the scouting report was on Drake May. There was this idea of, hey, under pressure in less than ideal conditions, his decision making, his footwork, this stuff can start to slip. And well, that sounds like a recipe for him to imprint the bad side of his scouting report early in his career instead of setting him up like, Dak Prescott was set up. I guess on that topic, real quick, give me any impressions you have thinking about Caleb Williams behind the Chicago
Yes,
line, Bo
I'm glad
Nix
you asked me
behind the
this.
Denver line. Yeah, well, go ahead. So let's start with Caleb Williams. Give me your impressions
So
on how
let's
that's going to affect him. Yeah.
let me start with Drake May, then we can move on. But because I
Mm-hmm.
actually like Drake May the best out of the class in terms of quarterback prospects. Now, nobody pays me for my quarterback opinions, so take it with a grain of salt. But I saw him make some really good big time throws. Yeah, he's raw. Yeah, he needs to get better, but he had a lot of uncertainty in that last year, changing offense coordinators, lost a lot of guys. It's like, coming from UNC is different than coming from LSU. is different than coming from USC, and it's like they have a different sort of vibes. I actually, if you were like, you have to pick a quarterback, Matt Bitonti, for your team, I would have picked Drake May, and I would have let him sit a year. Now the other guys, Caleb, I think the Bears line is extremely underrated. I have them at 22, and they could go higher than that. They're 13th in run ranking. So you're talking about a line that's much better at run blocking than pass blocking. I think that there were mock drafts where like they're going to take a tackle at 9. They were never going to do that. These tackles are young and up and coming. Darnell Wright, Broderick Jones, like that's a good unit. So I think Chicago is loaded, ready to make a move. All systems go on the O line front. Washington, problems. They don't know who their left tackle is right now. It could be this guy out of TCU, Brandon Coleman. It could be Charles Leno if they call him back up. They really don't have a left tackle, and that's really problematic. So I have them at 29th in the rankings. So that's going to be a bit of a different situation. I know we're talking about Cliff Kingsbury and RPOs and stuff, and maybe you can get away with more of that sort of play. I don't really know if that'll work, especially in that division. But who else do we have? We have Drake May.
Bo
That was
Nix.
Bo Nix. Okay, I have Denver at 12, which is actually another underrated line. Other than like the sort of questions at center, Garrett Ballas, Ben Powers, Quinn Meinerz is super good. Quinn Meinerz at right guard is ascending. There are a lot of guys like Brandon Thorne and a lot of like press guys that I respect who are really talking about Quinn Meinerz being the next great guard. So Mike McGlinchey at right tackle, solid as heck when healthy. I mean, I think they're an underrated line, actually. And if they go with Luke Wattenberg, I mean, he started some games for them. I call those guys pipeline players in my model.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how many games have you started for them? And is it 10 or less? Is it 20 or less? And like Luke Wattenberg's pretty firmly in the pipeline, and they have probably a better opinion than him than the national media does. So other than center, actually that line is surprisingly well situated, especially considering the press that's coming out of Denver and this and that. I think they'll be a live team, like a live underdog in a lot of these games.
And
Who else is
I
there?
I bring up Nix. Well, I mean, I think
That's
McCarthy
it, right?
shouldn't start until week
Penix, right?
17 or 18, and Penix isn't going to start. But we can talk really
No.
quickly at Penix. And the reason I made sure we talked about Nix is because unlike McCarthy, I mean, or even May, because that's going to be an interesting story to watch. Because I agree with you, Drake May should sit for a year, or like McCarthy. I mean, it's week 17 or 18. Like the Patrick Mahomes plan. Let him get a game in at the end of the year. Get his feet wet. But this is what you want. And Nix is going to have to be thrown out there because the other option is Jared Stidham. But you brought up Atlanta and Penix, and no, we're not going to look at this in terms of Penix, but how much? And I can bring the schedule in here too because it was just a schedule announcement. I bring in the schedule because Atlanta's opening schedule is Pittsburgh, at Philadelphia, Kansas City, New Orleans, Tampa Bay. Now, 4 of those 5 games are at home, but Atlanta has like one of the weakest home field advantages in the league. So Kirk Cousins coming back from an injury, Zach Robinson, Raheem Morris. This is a big, big season for a lot of people in Atlanta. How much could that offensive line help Kirk Cousins? Is it going to be like a luxury? Is this going to be something he's familiar with playing behind a line like this?
I mean, I'd have to do some research, but it could very well be the best line he's ever played with. I mean, I have him at third right now in the rankings, third in the pass protection, ninth in run rankings. We talked a little bit about it's finding a fit. Atlanta runs a very specific outside zone scheme, and there's all these stats out here that I've been sifting through, like like running game zone versus run gap scheme ratios, which you can get from certain websites, and like the fact that Atlanta's bringing back the same 5 guys, they all fit this like outside zone scheme. Drew Dalman at center is another one of these ascending players that is graded better. I think PFF has him as the 3rd rated center or something, which is not what you'd expect from a guy like that. Chris Lidstrom's like all pro all the way. I think they're a really good line. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
they're saying above average is is an insult. They're top 5. and
Yeah.
especially for what they do. You might take those players and ship them off to Chicago and say, now run gap scheme. And they'll be like, we don't do that. Like, like I'm Matthew Bergeron. I get to the second level or whatever. But these guys all can move. They can all pull. They step in the same directions. And yeah, I don't know what Kirk Cousins' health situation is or whatever. I did like Michael Penix a lot, and I never saw that as like a terrible pick. I feel like if you can get
Oh.
guys, I think the interesting thing about him is that he's left-handed. I feel like there's like when you draft a lefty, you have to like change the jug machines or something. Like you have to like make them rotate the other way, or I don't know. But
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, I like that. I like that move, and I like the organization. I think they get a bad rap on draft day for all their activities, but they'll be in the mix, especially in that division. There's like no real powerhouse, and if
Yeah.
they drop
Well,
the game to Kansas City, it's not the end of the world, right?
no, no, and I mean, but as we're alluding to with the schedule, we'll know. Through 4 weeks after they play Pittsburgh, Philly, Kansas City, and New Orleans, we'll have a pretty good idea how it's going, and it could be going very well. The Atlanta offensive line has continuity, and I like that you. I just want to go one step further because you've mentioned some things in passing, like Cliff Kingsbury can use RPOs to cover up some of the deficiencies with the Washington line potentially, or we're talking about Jim Harbaugh is going to things like Greg Roman, they're going to do things differently than the previous regime did. How does someone like Joe Alt fit into that? And it sounds like you're also looking at Atlanta's offensive line and saying, okay, well, Arthur Smith and his offense was what they were doing before, but now they're gonna have Zach Robinson, more from the Sean McVay, and you like the way that these guys translate to that change in philosophy.
Yeah, I'm always trying to improve my rankings. And I have all these like side categories, like average height, average weight. And this stuff doesn't make it to the article because I'm not quite sure how to apply it. But definitely the idea of who's calling these plays, what system do they run, how often do they run compared to how often they pass. Right now, we're in a league where every team is passing more than they run. That's like been the case for a
Mm-hmm.
few years. But within that 45, is it 45%? Is it 35%? How much do they run? And I feel like the teams that run more give the lines a chance to exact their will on the other team. An offensive lineman doesn't want to be in a spot where they're already down 21 nothing and they're going to pass block for the rest of the game. That sucks for them. They would
Yeah.
rather be running and then when it comes down, it's like body blows in boxing. And then when it comes down to passing
Yes.
time, they get a little bit of a break. So they want to deliver a blow rather than let these guys tee off on them. And I haven't quite cracked it. I'm looking at all the different angles for run zone scheme stuff, but there's something there. I think there's going to be at some point I'll be able to say this team is a good line, not just because they're a good line, but they're going to run a lot, or whatever it is. They
Mm-hmm.
have gap scheme tendencies, and all the guys they drafted fit this mold. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting closer to that. I'm trying to improve it, but it's not quite at a point where I could take it to Joe and be like, this is what I want to add to the article. But I'm always scheming for something.
Yeah, well, and it's not part of the reason it's not exact is that we can still triangulate things and say, they are switching to this scheme and these players don't have a lot of experience in it, and it can turn out wonderfully. Again, enter coaches, for instance, or like you said, maybe even just a change in philosophy. Maybe where in fantasy football, we've grown. Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh want to run the ball, but like you said, offensive linemen love that. Offensive linemen want to play, and the thing is, it can also mask a lot of deficiencies. I think that you can work with offensive linemen who maybe you don't want to have the outcome of the game rely on their pass protection abilities if you do establish a run. I mean, what you were describing is part of the puzzle. I think that analytics or this new algorithmic way of looking at the game doesn't understand that the people that play the game understand is just the difference in a team in the fourth quarter if you've successfully established the run versus, like you said, if offensive lineman has been having to pass pro the whole second half, and how frustrating that can be, and how that can be something that just it's not a recipe to win, and especially not a recipe to win when you have what Jim Harbaugh has in with the Chargers. I want to ask you. I thought this was an interesting thing that I observed, and I want to ask you if it passes the sniff test for you. I saw, and we're always reverse engineering well, what was this team thinking? And sometimes they are thinking things, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes we're even kind of like whenever certain television shows or movies go off the rails, and we're thinking, "Oh, this is actually some brilliant twist," and then by the end, we're like, "No, it wasn't a twist at all. The writing was a mess." Sometimes these teams are a mess, even though we're trying to come up with some internally consistent explanation. But it seems like the internally consistent explanation for what the Panthers did on the offensive line is they want to strengthen what's right in front of Bryce Young, right? They get Robert Hunt. They get Damian Lewis. Now, granted, again, Robert Hunt is probably a guy that you prefer as a run blocker to a pass blocker. So, I mean, that's part of it. Hey, they went and they drafted Jonathan Brooks too. So that adds to the picture. Do you think, and Dave Canales, another, we're talking about coaches, and we see what he did with Baker Mayfield. We see what he did with Geno Smith. So, these are quarterbacks that needed their confidence rehabilitated, like Bryce Young. Do you think that makes sense? Strengthening the interior offensive line to help him after the rough year he had as a rookie?
I mean, yeah, the Carolina Panthers have totally redone their interior, and I have them at 17th overall, but 7th in run blocking. To talk about the strength of the players, and to go back, we were talking about before about how it can help it can help an lineman, it can help a quarterback. It keeps the defense out there, and these NFL players are world class athletes, but the one thing they really don't have is stamina, especially in the lines. I'm sure Sauce Gardner can run all day, but Quentin Williams can't. And they have reps, and they have a certain number of snaps that they have to have before they become just kind of placeholders. And I really like the job they did. Robert Hunt is an underrated dude. He got a huge bag for his services, and I think he
Mm-hmm.
he deserved it. They're moving Austin Corbett to center. It's kind of a natural position for him. So they're like at 17th because of all the changes, but they have at least a point and a half or 2 points of cohesion worth there. So if nothing goes wrong and everything else above them breaks weird, you could see Carolina in the top 10 very easily.
Yeah, and again, we could be talking about all kinds of credit to be passed around. Canales and Bryce Young, maybe Xavier Legette has a good rookie year, and that's part of the story. You probably won't hear them talk a lot about the offensive line. Go ahead.
I like Xavier Legette's post draft press conference where he sounded like
Uh
Boomhauer, or maybe the guy from Waterboy. He sounded like
huh.
the coach from Waterboy. That's some deep South. I don't even know what that
Yeah.
accent was, but continue.
No, it's good. I mean, it's one of the
I mean, I'm going to
underrated
draft
things.
him higher in the league we're in. The
Yeah.
dynasty league. That gave him a round of that gave me a
Oh yeah.
round's worth of
Oh
boost.
yeah.
I
Oh,
love
when I
that.
saw Zamir White, I saw Zamir White was talking about like his farm and everything he does down on the farm. I don't know if you saw that one, Matt, but it was like
I did.
yeah, this is good. Give me the country strong running back. Give me the running back who's used to like cattle rustling and throwing
I
bales of
mean,
hay
the
around.
other side of it is a guy named like CJ Uzoma is at the end of his career, and he spent all his time going to Broadway shows. And he's like, "Yeah, I saw Hamilton 5 times." It's like you're not doing anything for me right now.
Right, right. And we won't even get into Aaron Rodgers. Okay, we will get into Aaron Rodgers, but not through Aaron Rodgers, through the Jets offensive line. And again, I know that your feelings are always going to be through the lens of a Jets fan, a lifelong Jets fan. But is this the year that maybe they got it right? I mean, it is an urgency. They were operating with urgency. Like there's a 1 year window, and that's it. And so at least the moves match the actual state of where the team is. Do you think it's going to work?
Um, I think it will work in a limited fashion in the sense that I think they'll break their playoff drought if everything breaks right. I don't. Will they go on a long run? We'll see. I don't think so. I don't really subscribe to the idea that you can go from nothing to Super Bowl champion. I think you need some sort of it's playoff football, and when you get there, it's a different sort of vibe. And teams like people look at the Bills, they went there 4 times. It's like a failure. It's like, no, you got to be there to roll the dice for the world's most strict one and done tournament. These head to head tournaments, anything can happen. So I think they might get into the tournament, but to go back to your original point, the model is the model. Like I put these numbers in and it spits it out. I've been doing this for 13, 14, 15 years. And like when I put in the Jets numbers, I got 7th in the rankings. And I had to like check it and recheck it because I'm like not used to like good news. But the model is the model. And when you sign Tyron Smith, you get more than just a former an all pro guy who's made a bunch of Pro Bowls. He's like a leader that the other guys, not just Olufashanu, but guys like Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera Tucker, even John Simpson's 26. You can look to him, you look to Morgan Moses, and you can learn how to be a professional and you little tricks of the trade. So I think there is a sense of wherever Tyron Smith was going to end up, that was going to be a good move. I can't be like, I'm a Jets fan and the Jets stink, so I don't like this move. You know what I mean? It's like any team that would have
Mhm.
signed this guy, it would have been a good move. And they know he's not going to play 17 games. He might not even play 12 games, but like they drafted a guy in the first round to supplement him. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff there. I will say this though, that the narrative was that the Jets O-line got Aaron Hurt or whatever. And I was at that game, and that was like a 2-second cut block quick hitter that Aaron like took the ball down and tried to go deep and tried to like he was a little gun shy with it. And like if you hold the ball for 4.5 seconds, it's
Mhm.
tough to blame the line for that, even though Dwayne Brown was done and all these things are true. Mekhi Becton was terrible and injury prone. Like that's all true, but it comes
Right.
down to your quarterback a lot of times and making those quick decisions. And when Garrett Wilson's open, you take it and that's it. And it's like I think the Jets will be good, but if Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, it won't necessarily be because of the line. It's just how these things go. I think Aaron Rodgers needs to be realize that he's at the point in his career that Manning and Brady were, which is just you're looks like a
Mhm.
jugs machine at that point. And if
Mhm.
someone's coming, throw it at their feet, and like
Yeah.
the time for creating is over, man. Like it's and that's
Yeah.
fine. You make like if he can do that, then they absolutely can do a lot this year. And but it's a tough spot. Buffalo's really good. The AFC is really good. I'm not like getting my hopes up, but like in terms of offensive line, sixth in pass blocking, 10th in run blocking, seventh overall. It's the highest I've seen them for a decade, or maybe like since the
Yeah.
Mangold, Brickashaw, Faneca era.
Yeah, I think when they were on the clock at number 10, they didn't take Brock Bowers. They took Olufashanu. That was a sign. Okay, there's reality. They're not in denial about what's actually going to matter if they can, like you said, at least get over the hump and get into the playoffs. Although as a Jets fan, it must be, well, at least gives you pause knowing that like you're on the bus and Aaron Rodgers is driving it. And well, it's going to end
So
up
let
where
me
Aaron
let me go
Rodgers.
back again to talk
Yeah.
about the O line coaches. They have Keith
Uh-huh.
Carter, who's like
Uh-huh.
notoriously not good, and they have Nate Hackett, who's notoriously not good. And it's like
Right.
we talked about the New Orleans healthcare situation. It's like the Jets
Mhm.
healthcare situation is also not good. And there are these players surveys, and they talk about how Kansas City had the worst facility and all this stuff. And like the Jets report was like, we didn't have enough training tables. It's like, how could you have a team with so many injuries and not have enough training tables? So when you dig deeper, you're like, yes, Tyron Smith is good. Yes, Morgan Moses is a good signing. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is a good signing, but that's all cap spending. What's happening beyond the
Mhm.
cap? And
Mhm.
what's
Mhm.
happening with the training staff and the turf field that everybody hates and all this stuff? And it's
Right,
like,
right, right.
like even if like David Bakhtiari still out there. Would David Bakhtiari even want to play on MetLife turf? He would probably
Right.
like say no, right? So I mean, for those reasons, I can't get too excited about the Jets. But on
Yeah.
paper, their lineup is good and they'll be in the mix. So, but like it's like they're favored in 14 out of 17 games, but their over under win total is only 9.5. It's like it feels like a
Mhm.
trap. It feels like Vegas is trying to trap us with this. Like they want that Jets money, that leaky New York money. And it's like, how could you be favored in 14 games and only have an over under of 9.5? Like, what are you telling me here? Right?
Right, right, and they opened with San Francisco, and then they,
Tough,
at
really tough.
San Francisco,
Yeah,
but
really
then
tough.
Tennessee, New England,
Those
Denver,
games
and
are 3
Minnesota.
games in 10 days. There's a lot of talk about rest. We could do an hour of
Oh,
talk about rest in the
gosh.
schedule, but the Jets were one of those teams that got 3 games in 10. There were 7 teams, I think, that this happened to. So
Oh,
they're certainly not the only ones. But very
right.
interesting article that came out about how
Yep.
Baltimore has the most rest. Like stuff like that, draft accordingly, man. Like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
or at least
that's
we should
that's your tip right there.
or we should be open to it, right? I mean, at the very least for these 7 teams, that have, let's see, like what happens to the team like the 3 or 4 weeks following that, or what does the injury report look like? Is it a turning point? Because for the Jets, the heartbreak is not only do they have the 3 games in 10 days, but it happens so early in the season. So if it does actually put extra strain on players, especially veteran players, that's that you don't
So
want to
I
lose
wouldn't
them that
expect
early in the
Tyron
season.
Smith to play all 3 of those games. I just don't.
Right?
I
You would
feel like
think in
he's
like a
going to miss.
load management kind of way.
Yep.
Yeah, you would hope so. You would hope
And you
so.
you
But like you
see
said,
this also. We were talking a little bit about the Falcons. You're like, well, they're not in a spot like this, but the coaches will manage these guys, and they'll be like, we need to beat Tennessee. That's a conference game. We don't need to beat,
right,
San Francisco. That's a non-conference game. And like they start
right.
weighing these playoff tiebreaker things, and then you get to the game, and you're like, the Jets were favored by 3, and they're getting destroyed. It's like they sometimes teams just don't show up. It's 17
Hmm.
games, and they have to pick and choose. And I know everybody that goes against like the religion of football of every snap matters and everything, but I'd be very surprised if Tyron Smith played all 3 games, and I'd also be surprised if Morgan Moses starts the season healthy.
Right,
He's coming
right.
back from a pectoral strain. It's a 6-month injury. He's 33 years old. He might not play all preseason. You know,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I think the team that has really internalized this and it reflects in how their season plays out always is the Kansas City Chiefs. I think Kansas City understands how to pace themselves, and we take the bait. I'll say I take the bait. Others do. That this isn't the Kansas City team of last year, or it's starting to run into some roadblocks, some obstacles. But then by the time the football really matters, they're right there again. Okay, speaking of what really matters, let's go off the rails. So I want to go back and revisit something we've talked about briefly from your past, but I just think it's fun to just ask them open-ended questions, because what a lot of people might not know, they know you hopefully from Draft Daddy back in the day, they know you from Football Guys, Matt Bitonti, offensive line guru. But people might not know that you were a DJ and also author. Look, a
yes,
budding author is going to write the great American novel.
trying.
But you were a you were a DJ. You were a
Yeah.
DJ. I guess I'll start by saying, like, how did that start? How does the story start where you ended up being a DJ?
Okay. So my senior year of high school, I graduated a year early. I was 16 when I graduated, so I took a gap, what Europeans call a gap year, and I was in this program called the English Speaking Union, and I said I just want to play rugby, and they sent me to Wales. So in between high school and
Wow.
college, I was in Wales for a year, and I did rugby and it was awesome. But the rugby season was over and I didn't really have much to do, so I started going. I was caddying at a golf course during the day, and then like I started going to these clubs. And this was back in the '90s, which I love, like Lithium era, and Nirvana, and all that stuff's coming back. I totally lived through all that, but I got overseas, and like America had this kind of like rock and roll is king vibe and disco sucks vibe. And then, but the rest of the world never thought that disco sucked. They kind of just moved on from it, and they built on it. And I was like, I saw these guys DJing, and I saw like guys like Jeff Mills, and I would go to Liverpool and Manchester and London, and I was like mesmerized by the idea of having turntables. So I bought these 2 turntables as soon as I got back to college. I'm in Maine. I'm the only guy with turntables. There's another guy who had turntables, and we became friends and we started DJing together and we taught each other. I met my friend Mike, who was, he's not with us anymore, but he was my mentor, and he was like an actual artist in the '90s. And he produced a lot of songs for all these famous labels, and he taught me how to beat match. So I mean, after college, it was just something I wanted to try. Now, I feel like I have good taste in music, and I feel like I can beat match a little, but where I was lacking was in the like charismatic kind of look at me kind of vibe.
Hmm.
Back
Hmm.
then you could kind of get away with just being a guy in a corner, but now you're like, everybody look at me, I'm going to do a
Yeah,
trick,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
like do something. And I never got into that. I think I'm just a free spirit, and I love art, and I love the vibe that when everybody came together on a dance floor is magical, but it was like ephemeral. Like you do it and it would be over, and it would be like one of those
Hmm.
mandalas or something. It's like sand
Yep.
washing into the sea. There's no lasting. um you just do it again and do it again, and after a while I just was like, I can't live like this. I need to like get a real job and get health insurance and like go straight or whatever. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was DJ Bito, Bito, and
Ah, it's
and
great.
people liked it. It was okay. It was, I think I'm better at writing than I am at DJing, but I love DJing. Kind of like how Ice Cube wants to be Shaq and Shaq wants to be Ice Cube kind of thing. Like I was put on this earth to write, but in my mind, I'm like, I would love to be like Derek Carter or like, one of these amazing DJs. But
Uh-huh.
it's like a time and a place. But I was kind of way ahead of the thing. Like everybody was like listening to the
Yeah.
Offspring and they would come up to me and they'd be like, "What is this?" And I'd be like, "It's Daft Punk," And I would also play a lot of like, rap and stuff, whatever it was necessary to get the party started. I played a lot of frat houses, played some clubs.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's very cool, but it's also like if you do it right, it's a tough lifestyle. It's like being a scout. Like you live out of a bag and
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
take your stuff from town to town, and it wasn't really for me. I think some people love the travel and stuff like that, and but yeah, I love music, and I was really more about bringing unknown music to people rather than becoming like Moby or something. Like I was more like a
Right.
guy that I would open for guys, you know what I mean? Or
Mhm.
and I would just want to play tracks because back then there was no. I mean, the internet was in its infancy, so like if something dropped, you have to go to the record store and like beg, borrow, and steal to get a copy of it, like a physical copy of it. And so the good news is that I can beat match like crazy on
Mhm.
turntables, which is like kind of a lost art, but I'm not doing anything with it. I kind of just do it in my bedroom. But like I've had people come over and they're like, "Where's your sync button? Where's your laptop?" And it's like, I'm not using a sync button or a laptop. You know what I mean? It's just like
Uh-huh.
it's kind of like saying I paint oils versus I do like comic books or Photoshop, which is awesome too. Like I don't want to like
Right,
discourage
right.
anybody who's doing the new stuff, but it's kind of like, or I sing opera. Oh, I sing, pop. Well, it's like I'm like kind of do things on a different level here, but I think there's some market for it, but I don't think I can even stay up that late to fill that market anymore. I'm too
Right.
tired, you know. But in my
It's
mind, I mean, I would love to do it again, but I don't really know where that would happen or when or how. But it is like I just thought the music was great, and it was kind of like no one knew what EDM was, so I was kind of just like
Mhm.
being a little
Yeah.
evangelical about it.
That no, it's great. I mean, we could do a whole hour, Matt, on your statement. The rest of the world never thought disco sucked, and everything that embodies about any number of topics. But that was an awesome walk through the world, and I like what binds it together is just loving music and wanting to share that love of music, just like we share our love of football. And we're gonna have to talk more about this time you spent in Wales next time you're on the couch, because that's in and of itself a whole other topic. But that's why we keep coming back, because we always have good topics. We always have good things going on. And again, Matt Bitonti covering all things offensive line and football guys. Check out his latest rankings. And as we go through the season and you want to know the significance of injuries or the significance of an offensive line coming together because they had a new coach and now it seems like they're clicking, et cetera, he's going to cover that for you. We got you covered, football guys, because we love you and we love you because you're so classy.